I sent the message right after takeoff. No dramatic punctuation, no desperate emojis, just a plain line in the family group chat. Flight lands at 3:00 p.m. Can someone pick me up? The words looked so small on the screen, like I was asking for nothing more than a carton of milk. But underneath them sat the heaviest truth of my life. I had just buried my husband. A military funeral overseas, a folded flag, a casket lowered by steady hands, the sound of a 21-gun salute that seemed to tear the sky itself apart. I had worn black for days, and not just on the outside. My soul felt dressed in mourning, stitched shut by sorrow. We had been married for years, though most of those years were spent apart. Deployments don't care about anniversaries or birthdays. I learned to count time not in celebrations, but in rotations. 6 months gone, 2 weeks home, 12 months away again. Still, love doesn't keep receipts. You give what you can, you endure what you must. That's the deal you sign when you fall in love with someone who wears the uniform. So I didn't ask for much. Not sympathy, not flowers, not even tears. Just a ride home. One small act that might have made me believe I still belonged somewhere, that family still meant something. The reply came before we even reached cruising altitude. My brother, we're busy, try Uber. 2 minutes later, my mother chimed in, why didn't you plan better? That was it. No, how was the funeral? No, we're so sorry. No, we're proud of him. Just cold, fast, clean rejection. I sat by the airplane window as the plane lifted above the clouds, staring into a silence that wasn't born of grief, but of realization. You think family holds you. Sometimes they hold the knife. My hands trembled, but not from tears. I typed back just 2 words. No worries. That was all. No fight, no guilt trip, no plea. Just silence returned for silence. When the plane touched down, I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I pulled my coat tight around me, walked past the baggage carousel where other passengers reunited with hugs and balloons, and stepped into the black SUV already waiting by the curb. Because while they were busy, while they were judging, they had no idea who else had flown back with me. They didn't know what I had carried home from the base or who was waiting beyond the headlines. That night, I didn't send another message. I didn't post a single word on social media. But when the 900 news came on, when their phones lit up with live coverage, I know they saw it. I know forks slipped from hands. I know my mother's wine glass shattered against tile. And I know one thing for certain, they will never forget what came next. The clip was less than a minute, but it was enough. The anchor's voice was steady, professional, the same tone used to deliver tragedies and triumphs alike. Today, a widow returned home from her husband's overseas military burial, alone but not unnoticed. Then the footage rolled. A black SUV pulling up to the airport curb. Me stepping out still in mourning black, a folded flag pressed tight against my chest. Behind me, 3 uniformed Marines, 2 women, 1 man stood like pillars. They hadn't just escorted me home. They flanked me, shoulders squared, backs, straight shields of silent solidarity. The camera zoomed in as I turned, handing a small, white-ribboned box to one of them. The anchor explained, in an unexpected tribute, the widow was met not by family but by her husband's former unit, who arranged a military-led escort in his honor. Then across the screen in clear block letters came my note, my handwriting, my words, steady, unshaken. If you ever find yourself standing alone at the edge of grief, don't look for the ones who left you there. Look for the ones who show up anyway. RM. They didn't say my full name. They didn't need to. Everyone in that family group chat knew exactly what they were watching. The final shot lingered, me walking away between 2 Marines, head high back, straight sliding into the SUV without a single tear. No interview, no begging for sympathy, just truth. Broadcast into living rooms across the city, into my mother's kitchen, into my brother's condo, into the hearts of strangers who had never heard my story until that night. The group chat fell silent for 24 hours. No reactions, no apologies, not even a cowardly, just saw the news. And sometimes silence tells its own story. My sister-in-law broke first. A private message. Was that you on Channel 5? I didn't answer. She didn't ask again. But the image spread. That still frame of me flanked by Marine's grief, wrapped tight, But dignity sharper still circulated everywhere, and behind the scenes, the ones who had left me stranded scrambled to rewrite history. My mother tried first. She posted an old photo of me and my brother as children at a 4th of July parade, hand in hand, smiles wide, innocence untouched. Caption family above all, always. I didn't like it. I didn't comment. I didn't need to because the top reply came from someone else. You didn't even pick her up from the airport. It got shared, and then shared again. Not by me, but by people who still believed loyalty was supposed to be a two-way street. My brother's turn came next. A single line text didn't realize it was that serious. You should have said something. I read it twice. I laughed once, as if grief needed an RSVP, as if burying my husband in a country they couldn't even pronounce was something I should have packaged better. I typed a reply, deleted it, typed another, deleted that too. Finally, I settled on 4 words. You made your choice, and so did I. No anger, no exclamation point, just a mirror held up to his own betrayal. The best part, I didn't have to say another word. The media had already asked for a follow-up segment. This time, they wanted me to speak, not just walk, not just mourn. They wanted the story, and I had every intention of telling it. I hadn't planned on speaking. Honestly, I didn't want to. Silence had always been my shield, my way of surviving a family who thrived on turning words against me. But silence protects the wrong people sometimes, and I realized it was time for mine to break. When the station called again, asking if I would share a widow's voice on air, I said yes. Not for sympathy, not for views, but for truth. The studio lights were hotter than I expected, but I didn't flinch. I sat in the chair, my black dress smoothed over my knees, the folded flag resting carefully on my lap. Across from me, the anchor leaned forward with the same softened eyes she used for stories of tragedy, but I wasn't here to be pitied. I was here to be heard. She asked the questions gently at first. What was my husband like? Where had he served? How long had we been married? I answered each one with the steadiness of a woman who had rehearsed these lines in her head 1,000 times, not because I had to, but because love makes you memorize someone's life, the way grief makes you memorize their absence. Then came the harder question. Did your family support you when you came home? The silence stretched for a heartbeat too long. I could have lied. I could have said they were busy or that grief makes people act in strange ways, but I didn't. I looked straight into the camera, into the eyes of whoever was watching at home, including my father, my mother, my brother, and I said no. They didn't, but others did. People who had no obligation to me showed up anyway. And sometimes that's all you need to keep standing. The anchor blinked, surprised by the sharpness of my honesty. She asked if I regretted saying it. I shook my head. The truth doesn't need permission, I told her. It only needs a voice. The segment aired that evening. Within hours, my phone lit up again, not with family texts, but with messages from strangers, widows, veterans, daughters who had buried parents without siblings showing up, sons who had been cast out of family homes for reasons too cruel to say aloud. They wrote, "You spoke for me. I thought I was the only one. Thank you for saying what I never could." And in that flood of words from strangers, I felt something I hadn't in years: community. Not the one I was born into, but the one I had chosen by telling the truth. Meanwhile, the silence in my family grew heavier, almost suffocating. My mother finally broke it, leaving a voicemail that cracked halfway through. "We didn't know how to handle it," she said. "We didn't mean to hurt you. But apologies without actions are like flowers on a grave, pretty but useless to the one buried beneath." I saved the voicemail not as comfort, but as evidence. Proof that even when cornered by public shame, their instinct was to explain, not to change. Weeks passed. The clip of my interview circulated online, shared in veteran forums, on social media pages dedicated to military families, even in classrooms where teachers said they used it to discuss loyalty and silence. My face, my words, my pain, they were everywhere. And with each share, I felt the distance between me and my blood relatives stretch wider. But here's the truth. I hadn't expected that distance didn't feel like loss anymore. It felt like air, like breathing without someone else's hand pressed over my mouth. One evening, while I was sitting on my balcony watching the sunset turn the sky to fire, I got a message from an old friend from my unit. "Saw you on TV," she wrote. "Proud of you. You finally fought for yourself." Her words hit harder than any headline. Because that's exactly what it was. Not revenge, not even justice. Just me finally standing on the front line of my own life unarmed except for honesty. My brother tried again weeks later, a short message this time: "We should talk." I didn't reply. Talking had always been their weapon. Silence was mine now. Because the story was no longer theirs to rewrite, it was mine to tell. And I had only just begun. The invitations began to arrive, and at first I ignored them. Veteran organizations wanted me to speak. Universities asked if I could guest lecture about resilience. Even a local church that had never once called me by name while I was growing up suddenly wanted me to share my testimony. For years, I had been invisible, reduced to silence in my family's shadow. And now, because I had finally spoken, everyone wanted to listen. But here's the secret I carried with me into every quiet night I didn't speak to be heard. I spoke because I was tired of swallowing my truth. Attention was never the goal. Dignity was. Still, there was one invitation I couldn't ignore. A high school not far from the house I once called home asked me to come talk to their seniors about service, sacrifice, and family. I almost said no. But then I thought about myself at 17, aching to escape a house that never felt like mine, dreaming of a world where courage mattered more than obedience. I thought about the girls in that classroom who might be carrying the same weight in their own homes, who needed someone to stand in front of them and say, "You're not crazy, you're not weak, you're just in the wrong story, and you have the right to write a new one." So I said yes. When I stood at that podium, the gym buzzing with restless teenagers, I felt my knees shake. Not from fear of them, but from the memory of every time I had been told to sit down and stay quiet. I began simply: "My name is Rachel. I served overseas. I buried my husband this year. And when I came home, my own family told me not to." The silence that followed was different than the one at my parents' table. This silence was heavy with empathy. Even the restless ones stopped shifting in their seats. I told them about loyalty, about how sometimes the people you bleed for will never lift a finger for you. I told them about betrayal, about watching my phone light up with rejection at 30,000 feet. And I told them about power, the kind that doesn't come from rank or medals, but from standing up for yourself when every voice tells you not to. When I finished, they stood. Not because they had to, but because something in them understood. And in that applause, I felt a kind of family I had never known, one built not from blood, but from recognition. That night, the family group chat lit up again for the first time in weeks. My mother: "We saw your speech. You made us look like monsters." My brother: "You're blowing this out of proportion." My father, for the first time, wrote directly: "You embarrassed us." I stared at the screen for a long time, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. Then I typed 3 words: "Truth isn't kind." I hit send, and then I left the chat, permanently. The quiet that followed wasn't lonely, it was clean. What they didn't know was that I had already started writing everything down. Every message, every silence, every betrayal. Not for revenge, but for record. Because stories matter. And too many of us are taught to bury ours so that others can sleep peacefully in their lies. Not anymore. In the weeks that followed, I began drafting a manuscript. Not a neat memoir tied up with a bow, but a raw account of what it means to serve, to sacrifice, and to come home to find your own blood has no room for you. I didn't know if it would ever be published, but I knew it needed to exist. Because somewhere someone would need it the way I once needed to know I wasn't alone. And maybe one day my family would read it. Maybe they would see themselves in the pages and finally feel the sting of recognition. Or maybe they wouldn't. Maybe they would dismiss it as exaggeration, as betrayal in return. Either way, it wouldn't matter. Because the story belonged to me now and no one could take it back. For the first time in my life, I didn't need their permission to exist. The manuscript became my companion. Every night after long days of work, I sat at my kitchen table and poured memories onto paper. Some nights I wrote with tears blurring the ink. Other nights I wrote with laughter at the absurdity of what I once accepted as normal, like the way my brother called me bossy. when all I had ever done was keep us fed, or the way my mother sighed when my name appeared on the caller ID, as though love were measured by inconvenience. Page by page, I stitched together not just my past, but my healing. Then one evening, an email arrived from a small independent publisher. Someone had seen my interview, then my speech, then stumbled upon a draft I had quietly shared online. They wanted to talk. Not about polishing the story into something glossy, but about keeping it raw, keeping it mine. I hesitated, afraid of giving my family another weapon to claim I had shamed them publicly. But then I thought of the silence I had lived in for decades and realized the shame had never been mine to carry. I signed the contract. The months that followed were a whirlwind of edits, meetings, and nerves. When the book finally launched, its cover stark and unflinching, I didn't expect much. Maybe a few readers, maybe a handful of reviews. But I underestimated the hunger people had for honesty. Letters poured in, emails from strangers across the country, soldiers' widows, estranged daughters, even sons who had walked away from toxic homes. "You told my story," they wrote. "You gave me permission to speak." My family, of course, exploded. My brother left a furious voicemail calling me a traitor. My mother wrote a letter that started with "How dare you" and ended with "Don't ever come back." My father stayed silent, but silence has always been his sharpest blade. And yet, for the first time, their outrage didn't undo me. It liberated me. Because their fury meant they had read it. They had seen themselves unfiltered through my eyes. And that mirror was something they could not shatter. Months later, I stood at a book signing a line curling out the door, and a woman my age approached. She pressed my book to her chest and whispered, "I buried my husband too. My family didn't show up either. Thank you for proving we aren't invisible." I hugged her, and in that moment, I knew my story was no longer just mine. It belonged to everyone who had ever been cut out of the very circle they kept alive. Back at home, the family group chat buzzed again for the first time in months. A message from my father. Just 2 words. We read. I stared at it for a long time, the cursor blinking in the empty reply box. I didn't type anything, because I had already spoken loudly, publicly, permanently. I closed the app, placed the folded flag back on my mantle, and sat in the glow of the lamp. The house was quiet, but it wasn't empty. It was filled with the voices of every stranger who had told me too. It was filled with my husband's memory, steady and unbroken. And most of all, it was filled with a version of me I had never known before. The woman who no longer begged to be picked up, but who had finally learned how to stand. And that, I realized, was the ending I had been writing toward all along. Not reconciliation, not revenge, but recognition. So if you've followed me this far, hear this. Sometimes the family you're born into will betray you. Sometimes they will tell you not to come home, even when you fought for theirs. But there are other families waiting, the ones you choose, the ones who show up, without being asked, the ones who see you as whole. That is where I found my healing. That is where I finally found home. Thank you for listening to my story. If it touched you, please like this video, share it with someone who might need it. Subscribe for more, and leave a comment. I would love to hear your truth too, because the more we speak, the less alone we are.